Hi everyone, this is Miss Riley and you're about to watch a video on commands. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to recognize what a command is, know the different types of commands and when to use them, know the formations of all of these different types of commands, and know what to do with object pronouns. First, let's start with what is a command. A command is used when you are telling someone to do something or not to do something. And there are two basic types of commands. We have affirmative commands, which is when you're telling someone to do something, and then you have a negative command where you're telling someone not to do something. We're going to start with your two commands. Keep in mind that two commands are when you are talking to just one person and you would use the to form, so you're maybe talking to them informally. Let's start with affirmative commands because the formation in affirmative commands and negative commands are going to be different. The way that you form affirmative commands is by simply placing the verb in the third person singular or singular of the present indicative, which is the él, ella, and usted form. So here are some examples. We've got corre, come, baila, juega. Notice that if a verb happens to be stem changing, it's going to stem change also in this to command form. So any kind of change that you would normally have in the él, ella, or usted form, for most verbs, you're going to maintain that change as a to command. There are some irregular verbs. I call them the shorties. Keep in mind that these shorties are only for affirmative to commands. So here's our grid here. We've got decir, which is di, hacer, haz, ir, which is be. We've got pon, tal, se, ten, and ben. And notice that I put a little star next to the verb ser because there's an accent. Negative commands are basically the subjunctive to forms. Remember that the way that we form subjunctive is you first put the verb in yo form, present indicative, and then you switch the endings. Switching endings means that for AR verbs, I'm going to use ES, and for ER and IR verbs, I'm using an A. I have here, for the to command, you're using an ES and an AS because they're still in the to form. So here are some examples. If I want to say don't dance, and I've got no bailes, no corras, no escribas. Remember all of those verbs too, whose spelling is going to change once you add opposite endings. Think of these verbs like cargar, zar. Remember that when I'm adding an E, because opposite endings of all of these A's are going to be E's. And remember how E's can change the sound of a lot of consonants, such as the G, so in car. So notice what happens with these verbs. It looks kind of like the preterite, except there are no accents. Look at juegues. I've got two changes here. Not only is it stem changing, but then I also have to add the U because it's a gar verb. With the zar verbs, remember the rule that I cannot have an E after a Z, so that's why I'm changing the Z to a C here. And with car verbs, I'm changing the C to a QU. All of these are going to maintain that preterite change, except notice that there are no accents. And then remember verbs that are go verbs. Since we're putting verbs first in the yo form, all of these go verbs in the yo form present indicative have that irregularity, have that go. So no pongas, no tengas, no hagas, no vengas, and no salgas. And then here are our two commands that are irregular in the negative form. We've got seas, vayas, estés, and des. Usted commands. Usted is you are still talking to just one person, but you're using the usted form instead of the to. The affirmative and the negative forms are going to be the exact same formation, except you're just adding a no. Basically, it is the subjunctive usted form. So you're changing it in the yo form, and then you add those opposite endings, except notice that it's the usted form opposite ending instead of the to form. So here's some examples. Tomé, Ponga, remember those go verbs and all of those other spelling change verbs like cargar, zar. That's going to apply here too. Escuche, llegue, despierte. I still have a stem change here. My irregulars for usted commands are going to be sea, vaya, esté, notice the accent, and de. And all of these, again, you all will notice are in the usted form. These are the subjunctive forms, basically. Ustedes commands. So ustedes commands, I'm talking to more than one person. The formations are going to be exactly the same as they were for usted commands, but I'm simply adding an in. So pongan, tengan, escriban. This is basically the ustedes subjunctive form. My nosotros commands. With nosotros, you're talking to a group of people, but including yourself. So examples in English would be like, let's go to the movies, or let's eat dinner right now. Those are nosotros commands. The formation is going to be present subjunctive, but in the nosotros form. A couple of quick notes about nosotros commands. Vamos is going to be used instead of vayamos, because remember that vayamos is the subjunctive form in the nosotros, but when you're using it as a command, you just say vamos. And here are some examples. Tomemos el tren, so let's take the train. No hagamos nada, let's not do anything. Salgamos esta noche, so just basic subjunctive form. Vosotros commands. Remember that vosotros means you all. It's just used in certain regions, like in Spain. The affirmative vosotros command is formed by replacing the R in the infinitive with a D. So contestar, notice that I've taken away that R and I've simply replaced it with a D. That's all that you do. So contestad el teléfono. Vended. I'm not changing the ending. I'm not doing anything with my A or with my E. I'm only exchanging the R for a D. Abrid. Servid. Arreglad. My negative vosotros commands are going to be formed by the vosotros form of the present subjunctive. Remember those accents. So I've got no compréis nada, no comáis tanto, no pidáis leche. And I have a little star here too, because remember that in the subjunctive, stem changing formations have their own set of rules. And I do at the end of this presentation have a reminder of what those subjunctive rules are for stem changing verbs. Before we get into object pronouns and using them with commands, here's just a quick refresher on what your object pronouns are. We've got direct objects over here, indirect here, and reflexive pronouns over here. So first thing is, with object pronouns, we attach to affirmatives. With any type of affirmative command, you are going to attach your pronouns to the end of that verb. So here's some examples. I've got hazlo. Notice that as, number one, is a to command. It's one of the shorties. And then I'm attaching my lo, my direct object. Dime, tell me. Quédense. Pónganselos. Notice here that two pronouns can still be attached. And when you are attaching two pronouns, your reflexives or your indirect objects come before your direct objects. So that's in this example. Pónganse, the se is the reflexive pronoun, the put on yourself, and then the los is the direct object. Put them on yourself. And written accent marks are placed over the stressed syllable of the verb when you attach pronouns. Keep in mind that when you are attaching other pronouns, you are changing the syllables of of the actual verb. So you're going to be adding a written accent mark for your new stressed syllable, except when you have a single pronoun that's added to a one-syllable command form. So here's an example of that. The verb dar, when I put that as a to affirmative command, it's just di, which is one syllable. So if I'm just adding one pronoun, like in this example, dime, I do not add any accent marks because the D is already naturally stressed. But over here, I'm adding two pronouns. So I've got dímelo. So now I'm actually adding a written stress. With negative commands, I put my pronouns in front of the verb. So no lo hagas, no se lo digas. Notice that in these examples, the pronouns are not one word. That it's one pronoun, I have a space, and then I have the other pronoun. And I still do reflexive pronouns or indirect objects before my direct object. With nosotros commands, when I'm attaching pronouns to affirmative commands, if I'm attaching nos or se to the end of a nosotros command, that final S is going to be dropped. And again, I'm adding a written accent mark to the stressed syllable of the verb. Here's some examples. Notice that instead of, if I take away the nos, I would have quedemos, but that S is gone. So quedémonos. Sentémonos. Notice again that that S that would be here is gone. Vámonos. Okay, and then here are those additional subjunctive stem changing rules that are especially going to be important when you're looking at nosotros commands. ER and AR stem changers are going to change in the exact way in the subjunctive as they do in present tense. Remember, in present tense, you stem change all of the forms except for nosotros and vosotros. And so we can see here that in the subjunctive, it maintains that rule where I have not stem changed here or here. However, with IR verbs, it's going to be different. With IR verbs, if I have verbs that change E to IE or E to I, then I'm going to have an I in my nosotros and the vosotros forms. That's totally different than in the present. So here's an example with servir. Notice that I have this stem change throughout, even in my nosotros and my vosotros forms. And then here's sentir. This is an E to IE verb. So here are my IEs, but then once I get to nosotros and vosotros, it just changes to an I. And then finally, in my IR verbs, O to U changers are going to have a U in the nosotros and vosotros forms. So here's my example. I've got muera, mueras, muera, muramos. Here's that U in the nosotros and in the vosotros forms.